So we're up to part 2. We're on page 36 of chapter 3, and we're still looking at whakapapa ties. And we're looking at the Pungarihu Minute Book from 1884. And this whakapapa connects to Taiaroa, who is shown 6 generations before the Ngāti Tūpoho chief Te Māwai. And we've got Tū Taiaroa, who had 2 children, Korako Titoko and Porete. And from Korako Titoko, ka puta ia taunga rahi, ka puta ia te ora, ka puta ia te aiwa, ka puta ia te Māwai. And from the other Tamaiti, I think, Porete, came Waitangi, and then Ngātairua, and then Putere, and then Te Kere. Children of Tamakihu and Ruaka. Tamakihu, Te Ati Haunui a Paparangi chief, and his first wife Ruaka had 3 children. Hininaka of the upper river, Tamaupoko, who settled in the middle reaches, and Tūpoho, associated with the lower Whanganui. Their names are regularly invoked to express the basic unity of the people. This is also emphasised by certain sayings such as I aranga ki awai, te taura whiri, or Hininako, the plaited rope of Hininako, which refers to the ties between the people of the river. The centrality of the sacred acts, to which we will return again to the traditions of the Whanganui people, is contained in one of the foundational whakapapa lines from the 8th stanza of the Tainui Karakia, or Te Kāwanga, which also refers to the tradition of the 3 ancestors. It is with the Aotearoa tradition. Taumaha koe I te kāhui pau nui, paurua, waka tupuna. Hora hia ngā kōrero, ki roto o warekura, amo ake nei au I taku toki, ko te awhiorangi. Toki rongo, nui, toki roa, toki haha. Amohia ake taku toki toki nei. Ki te uiwhiti, ki te uiroa, kia rahi me ona wihuinga, me ona rāwenga. Ko Waitangi o tēnei ware, ka utua, ko te taurāwhiri a Hininako. You who toiled gather by yon pillar, the big pillar, the tall pillar, the sacred pillar. Orations by many are soon to be made within this house of sacred learning. I now bear this axe of mine aloft like unto Te Awhiorangi. 'Tis an axe of renown, a long-handled axe, a sharpened axe, the axe of mine which I bear on high, to be resharpened, is handle-bound and adorned anew. What is the name of this house? Response. 'Tis the rope of the twisted strands of Hininako. The scholar Pei Te Hurunui shows how the strands tie in Ngāti Tūpoho people as well. Hininako married Tamahina, and from that union came Tāpaka, Tamakihu, Tirikau Tikura, who married Manupure, and Te Awhitu. 5 generations later, this line marries into Potama the first. Questions have been raised as to whether the twisted braid tradition of the 3 ancestors is a modern invention. It is clear that these associations with Tū Taiaroa predate Tihi's still uncompleted legal engagements on the river from 1935, because the same associations are clearly described by Downes in 1915. So this is where the Waitangi report is trying to position the authenticity of those 3 tupuna as leaders on the awa, and of course us by extension, their descendants. The child of Tūranga Pito and his wife Hinemoana was named. He was given the title of Tū Taiaroa. He became the stone pillar from whom descended all of the chiefs of Whanganui, even to the Rangitane tribe. All that sort are chiefs. All the Taniwha great chiefs of this river of Whanganui came from this chief. Hence is the saying correct, a spliced rope entire from source to mouth. Even if this people turn upon themselves, the seaward tribes against the inland, Should a stranger attack Whanganui, they gather people together as one people. They cannot be overcome by the other tribes, but the strange tribes will suffer at the hands of Whanganui. Hence the saying, a spliced rope, if broken, is made whole again. Downes is directly quoting from Smith's translation of Kirihoma's account of Wakatapui and Tūtaiaroa. The three strands of the braid appear about halfway down the whakapapa, which means that the significance of many other ancestors and tribes have been left out, at least for general appraisal. This does not mean that they are not discussed on Marae. They clearly are. It simply means that these other traditions are really available for scrutiny in public ways. It's a grey area, that bit. Ngāti Tūpoho. The late Manu Merikingi made a strong point in his oral history that for him Tūpoho as one of the ancestors was representative of his people, including Manu's own family, but only as far as the water of the river was concerned, that his significance in relation to the tradition would not be the same for the lands. For him, Tūmango was the name taken on as a result of the need of the people at Putiki to have a formal way of relating to the impact of the new settlement of Pākehā across the river. By the 1860s, they were known as Tūmango. He then linked Tūpoho, Hininako and Tamaupoko as is customary by adding, those three children were placed as guardians of the three sections of the river, one for the north end, one for the middle reaches and one for the lower reaches. Now, in my reasoning, that is for the water, not the land. In its Whanganui River report, the Waitangi Tribunal is cautious in its use of whakapapa. It notes that many hapu see themselves both as separate groups and as a collective whole. The tribunal reminds us that Māori identities are defined by whakapapa, not boundaries, and loyalties fluctuate according to the temperament of the border hapu at any time. And this is where our PSGE activity and our settlements have had such a massively damaging impact on our world as Māori, to have to choose one marae to affiliate just to be able to be engaged in that political space in itself has been the single most devastating negative thing that has come out of the settlements. The fact that in our minds now this generation believes they belong to only one pa, and they might have whakapapa all over the place, but the government has told them you're only allowed to flex over one pa. And we've also stopped birthing marae and hapu, so we'll talk more about that. Of the twisted braids tradition, the tribunal is cautious, simply noting it is a tribal saying. And this is again where the tribunal, the Waitangi Tribunal, has started actually dictating to us what our kōrero means, or is allowed to mean. The braided strands tradition is a useful way of describing relations on the river, each group separate, yet each a part of the whole, usually not in one braid, but multiple strands of varying width that are both complex and mutually reinforcing. Wakatapui and Tūreriao. Lots of spelling mistakes in this report. Wakatapui and Tūreriao. The story of Wakatapui and Ngāti Ruanui and Tūreriao is told by Percy Smith per Kirihoma to Wāwakia, is another indication of just how closely related the different strands are. Pregnant, Wakatapui was tempted to the extreme measure of taking some of her taro from the food store and was accused of stealing seed taro. Her husband, Paiho, accused her with such anger that she resolved to leave him while Paiho was out fishing. She would pursue the famed Tūreriao, whom she eventually found at Kokohoia. She came upon him gathering kākoho, toitoi reeds, for his house from Kokohoia. Without revealing who he was, he took her upriver to Oneheke, on the river at the seaward end of the Whanganui town. So this is the story about ties again between Ngāti Ruanui and the Whanganui. She then headed upriver with him by canoe. Paiho pursued them by foot and came opposite their camp at Aramoho. Words were exchanged and an understanding was reached. Paiho left a dogskin cloak for his impending son. The rock on which Paiho sat is still known as Otu Māori. The new couple then journeyed to Utapu and there raised a family. The first son was cherished by his stepfather. The second son, Tūranga Pito, a famous son of the river and father of the even more famous Tūtaiaroa. What does this tell us? First, the people living upriver at Utapu came as far down as Kokohoia for material for their homes, upriver. Secondly, that they made good use of Oneheke village beside the river, known as the Ngāroru spot. Third, the Ngāti Ruanui are linked early in history by intermarriage with the Whanganui people. Fourth, as we shall see later in the 19th century, Tūranga Pito is also the name of a notable Ngāti Apa warrior, reinforcing the fact of bloodlines between Whanganui and that tribe. The story continues. With the original Tūranga Pito accompanying his people on a raid against Ngāti Maniapoto. In their opening gambit, they performed a haka and Tūranga Pito danced with such skill that Hinemoana fell in love with him, thus ending that war between Ngāti Maniapoto and Whanganui. However, a Ngāti Maniapoto tawa returned later and were only put off by Hinemoana's trickery. Tūranga Pito then chased the tawa and slayed many of them. But in fact, the story tells us also that to the mix of Ngāti Ruanui there came within a generation or two, and not for the last time, an added infusion of Ngāti Maniapoto to the Whanganui lines. It is important to note that the tradition of the spliced rope usually associated with Hinenako, Tamaupoko and Tūpoho is here offered by Kirihoma in regard to Tūtaiaroa. Kirihoma, it should be noted, is also down source in regard to Tūtaiaroa. Just wanted to come back to where this author has chosen to very specifically mention the fact that Whanganui had infusions from other tribes. Now to us that feels like a great thing because we're always about reinforcing and reconnecting. But to the Whanganui Tribunal, to the Waitangi Tribunal, something like that gives them premise to not award certain rights to Whanganui people on the Whanganui, which is why they've chosen to put it into the report like that. And that's why it's really most telling to understand what doesn't go into the reports, to understand what the objectives of the acts of law that come out of settlement are. They very specifically and selectively omit things in these reports. We'll carry on. It is important to note that the tradition of the spliced rope, usually associated with Hinenako, Tamaupoko and Tūpoho, is here offered by Kirihoma in regard to Tūtaiaroa. Kirihoma, it should be noted, is also down source in regard to Tūtaiaroa. As for me, I came from this ancestor, Tūtaiaroa, but not me alone, but all the Taniwhas, great chiefs, of the river of Whanganui. That is, all the great chiefs who have been heard of in this island, commencing at the source even to the mouth of the river. Hence is the saying correct. A plaited rope entire from the source to the mouth. Even if this people turn upon themselves, the seaward tribes against the inland, should a stranger tribe attack Whanganui, they gather together as one people. They cannot be overcome by the other tribes, but the strange tribes will suffer at the hands of Whanganui. Hence the saying, a spliced rope, if broken, shall be made whole again. So like all good ideas, the twisted braid has become used earlier in Whanganui history in a time before the three ancestors. Other lessons to be learnt here are that the upper river people were engaged in a long-standing war with Ngāti Maniapoto, but that a foundational ancestor, Tūtaiaroa, who is half Ngāti Maniapoto, connects to all the river Ariki indeed. It may be in his Ngāti Maniapoto ties that he is particularly significant in that Ngāti Maniapoto in the upper regions of the river is a near and powerful neighbour. Furthermore, there is evidence of lower river ancestral and customary use of the upper river. And customary use of the upper river hunting areas declining, but still being exercised in 1875. So up until 1875, we were still moving around relatively normally and accessing our mahinga kai and other resources, and apparently still living in Raupo Whare. Clearly, Whanganui people, and it is thought that the author came from Jerusalem, felt their rights still existed in places where houses and canoes had been made and hunting done. We've got, looks like a letter to the editor from 1871. A meditation on remote land interests in 1871. To the editor. On the 31st day of December 1871, a large party of our people proceeded from various settlements on the Whanganui to the district of Tongariro with the object of pointing out to our children and young men certain lands in that district in which we have an interest. After being 2 nights on the road, we reached a place called Okawa. Here we left our horses and proceeded on foot. After being 6 nights on the road, we arrived at Wakapipi. On the 9th of January, we divided into two parties. Te Reimana and his friends proceeding to Rangatawa, and Te Kire and his friends to Rakatawa, and to various other parts of Tongariro. Our party went to Waipuna and Te Hihi to look at the sites of our houses in times past and the stumps of the trees from the trunks from which we had formed canoes, and also the streams and places where we used to snare birds. Wikitoro Te Wehi took the road by way of Wakapipi himself. His daughter Mirania went after him and endeavoured to persuade him to return, but he would not hearken to her, saying that the course he was taking would bring him out upon the main road. His daughter then gave him 10 potatoes, and he went out on his way, and she returned to our party. After we had journeyed for 3 days, we came out upon the main road, but we saw nothing of Wikitoro. We searched for him, but could not find him. Afterwards, a false prophet named Patiriki said he was not dead and urged us to again send a search party after him, saying he would command a ruru of the forest to guide the party. Accordingly, Menahira, Rotohiko and others proceeded to look again for him, but they only tired themselves fruitlessly and returned exhausted without finding him. So we knew that he was dead. He was a man of some rank and had many relations among the Ngāti Ruaka and 3 children living, all daughters. We hereby warn the people of Wakapipi, Waikohu, Rakitawa, Aramaire, Purutaka, Rangakauika, Puhi, Waipuna, Te Hihi, and onto Pararawa, below Turi o Te Wakaheke, that they eat not the pigs of those parts. If Wikitoro had been found, they might do so, but as it is, no doubt he has been devoured by the pigs. And that's been written by Rini Hiemoata. Other canoes. Since the river's path from Tongariro to on the North Island's volcanic plateau is gradual and navigable over about 230 kilometres, not only were many pa and village sites built along its banks and cliffs, it also became one of the great arterial routes through the central North Island. This has ensured that other tribes, such as those of the Tainui Confederation, Ngāti Raukawa and Ngāti Maniapoto, as well as Ngāti Kahungunu of the Takitimu canoe and Ngāti Tūwaretoa of the Arawa canoe, also contribute to the genealogical history of the river. So to the lower reaches does the Kurahaupua. Indeed, Hardy claims that the Ngā Pamuana's lines descend from 8 waka: Aotea, Kurahaupua, Tainui, Te Aroa, Horouta, Mātātua, Takitimu and Tukumaru. With the exception of Ngā Paurangi, most subtribes in Hapu on the river make claims to a similar range of waka through intermarriage. When Ngā Paurangi settled here, they went upriver to live. So began the tradition of coming down to the mouth of the river in the season to fish, dry them, and take them back upriver, a custom adopted by most people of the region, and is in fact what we used to do here in Kaiwi as well. We jump into the Kaiwi down here and head up to the coast, fish for a couple of weeks, bring it all home. At the conclusion of the 1847 skirmish in Whanganui, an early settler commented, If you had seen the number of fish caught at Putiki Pa the first day of the season, you would not be surprised at the anxiety of the taua up the river to make peace for the summer. Once upriver, they were spared the worst of the pestilential wind and were safer from invaders, even the later musket-bearing heke. There was a reciprocity to the downriver visits. For every canoe that returned upriver laden with dried fish, it would seem that there was one returning downriver, probably in early winter, filled with the bounty of the birds that were hunted in the highlands. The image is metaphorical inasmuch as some of this traffic would have been on foot. Along some of the pathways we have been able to name and show, the point is that the traditions of convergence at the river mouths in the fishing season are well understood. Least recognised is the seasonal movement back towards the mountains and the ranges for birds, as is contained within many minute books. And for the sake of completion, let us add that wherever there were streams, inlets and wetlands, the people of the region also worked at their freshwater fisheries, tuna especially, piharo, kokopu, whitebait, and so on. Chapter 4. Lakes, Streams, and Rivers. An entire report by Ma was written on the inland waterways and lakes used by tangata whenua as part of their cycle of customary halves in the region. It is not intended to repeat her arguments and examples here. There is a case, however, that points to the way in which the McLean Purchase denied Māori not only much of their traditional lands, but also their traditional places of mahinga kai. And mahinga kai is where we just used to gather stuff. We didn't have to cultivate it, it just grew. So swamps and things like that. The Reverend Richard Taylor described eel cuts and spoke of drains made from lakes or swamps with eel weirs at the outlet to catch the fish, which flow out in great quantities during the floods. Of these, the natives are extremely jealous. They are the property of the first maker, but in process of time, this right becomes dispersed amongst different members of the family and thus occasions disputes. To show you the value put down upon their fisheries in nearly every instance where land has been sold to the Crown, these rights have been retained. And to this day, even today, most of the whenua blocks that we still have access to and still have under our control are probably those sites. We've only really got the quite special sites left now. As late as 1884, Hori Kire Paipai was still seeking his rights at Paude and Wiritoa Lakes, as well as for firewood on number 1 and 2 lines, survey lines in the district. Ma shows that in the low-lying swampy coastal flats among dune lakes in the area between the Whanganui and Waitangi rivers, a cut or drain would be dug from the lagoon or swamp to an area well out on the coastal sandflats. Fish species recorded in the inland waterways of the district include eel, tuna, of various types and taken at various stages of their lifestyles, such as elvers or tunadiki, various forms of whitebait, such as inanga and kokopu, freshwater crayfish, koda, we used to get those here too, freshwater mussels, kakahi, shrimp, mawhitiwhiti, bully, toitoi, small freshwater fish, pariri, paniroro or upukororo, and lamprey, piharo, as well as fish from the waterways. Waterfowl such as whiro or blue duck was also a food source in running streams. The Whanganui River Valley was also an important settlement area with the fertile river flats being used for cropping. Kangarua Pa on the Whanganui was a major settlement, and early surveyors in the valley in the 1880s recorded that they could still live on pigeon and eels as well as pork. 1880s. The inland waterways also provided access to nearby forest resources important for food and the materials required for snaring, preserving, and transporting food items. Oh, they must have had huia there. Forest birds such as kereru, kaka, tui, and kokako were important food sources, while their feathers were also used for a variety of purposes, including personal decoration or korowai. Waterways also gave access to rat, kiore, trapping at areas such as rat trapping areas such as Te Hino, south of Taumaranui, and presumably in a number of other places. Now, we've still got a Hino Street in Whanganui. It's named after that spot. Ma, who cites witness evidence given on the coastal Kaiwi block in 1889, noted many settlements in the area, but also large surrounding areas where resources were traditionally managed. These included numerous eel fisheries in streams and swamps, tawa and hinua berries, and karaka drupes were collected, and rats, pigeon, weka, and kaka was snared. Kumara too was cultivated. On the Maireho block, among others, the inland waterways were important for canoe building egress. Eel cuts were used on coastal swamps, but also on inland waterways. At the Mangapapa block hearings in 1881, eel weirs were described at Lake Rotokohu, where eel cuts join it with the Waitotara River. Ma says this indicates that many waterways and wetlands of the district were not only fished, but also modified to encourage and promote fishery catches. 100% happened on this river. These modifications were deliberate, but also modified to encourage and promote fishery catches. This is but a short example describing use of freshwater habitats by lower river hapu, indicative of customary use of diverse sources of food and material on a regular basis. Now, again, in my mind, I'm pretty confident that the Waitangi Tribunal has put that particular clause in, stating that Māori regularly moved and modified waterways. Now that's been mentioned, I believe, to undermine the resistance of Māori to modern modifications of our waterways. That gives them an opportunity to say, well, you fellas did it. This is a short example describing use of freshwater habitats. The frequency of use varied according to many factors, including proximity to the resources, seasonality, demand based on hakari and regular population, and, of course, availability from other resources. The claimants themselves will detail many of these activities and interrelationships in their own submissions. And that's in the individual claims, which also are quite difficult to get your hands on, but I do have a number of them if you're looking. Te kaiho o kupe. We're up to page 46. Wakefield described how when he arrived at Whanganui Mouth in 1839, it being summer, he passed through the fishing fleet on his way to visit Putiki, noting also much activity in the drying of fish for preservation purposes. John Mason wrote that the huts near the mouth of the river formed the temporary residence of the natives during the fishing season, the apparent cultivations being up the river extended to 1 to 5 days inland. Richard Matthews' letter to the Secretary of the Church Missionary Society, 13th of November 1840, noted, the inhabitants of the river came down the river mouth to fish, but there is little land here which they think good enough to plant. When young Wakefield called the spring Wahipuna at Langard Bluff, was a camp where a number of large canoes were pulled up with several hundred people below a cliff, a small rill which gurgled from halfway up its side, a great place for the encampment of passing village visitors. He describes the principal village same side, a mile above Wahipuna, which is Putiki, on the flat between the bluff and the escarpment. At daybreak next morning, a whole fleet of canoes went out to the sea to fish. There were at least 50 sailing. At the flood, which was in the afternoon, or high tide, they all entered the river and proceeded to fish for the kahuai, large shoals of which had come in with the tide. He describes 3 hours of fishing under sail or paddle. It is clear from his account that fish both at sea and at the mouth were in plentiful supply, which was brought ashore for processing. John Mason, Whanganui's first European missionary, noted in the following summer an influx of Māori to the coastal area to take fish in abundance for the summer fishing season. There was also the gathering of special pipi named Tuangi on the Castle Cliff coast. Wahipuna was also a place from where freshwater mussels were taken. The boundaries of some of the hapu who comprise the southern Whanganui cluster will be given by those kaumātua Kuian scholars on the tribes who make up the claim. However, some historical boundaries will be referred to in passing. Labial and more ecological than lines on a map, they are, of course, as good as their source at the time they were given. In general terms, what was given a century ago was from a group called the Whanganui Awa Marae Council, is still useful in offering markers for the interests of the descendants of Hinenako, Tama Upoko and Tūpoho. I don't know anything about the Whanganui Awa Marae Council, but I guess I better learn about them. From the mouth of the Whanganui, Tuwera, Ngā Pairangi, Ngāti Rongomai, Tāwiri and others, member for that district is Tōpia Turoa's son, Hone Wārena. For some reason, Tama Upoko, Tūmango and Tūpoho are in others. Oh, that's interesting. Commencing at Atene Te Galatia and ending at Kawana, the hapu are Ngā Pautama, Ngāti Paumoana, and others. I think that's a spelling mistake. Oh, it might be translation. Member for this district is Pāretia H. Wereta. Commencing at Ranana number 3 and ceasing at Kauairo, the hapu of that district are Ngāti Roaka, Ngāti Hine Korako, Ngāti Hine Araki, and others. Mātini Toarangi Tahi is a member of that district. Commencing at Hiruharama number 2, ceasing at Pipiriki, Ngāti Hau, Ngāti Tamakihu, Ngāti Tauira, and other hapu of that district. I'll just show you how those references have been printed there. Whanganui River mouth, how shared. Ngāti Tūmango are a people who settled relatively late in the area of Pūtiki, and having done so were on the receiving end of a number of raiding taua. Most notably from Te Rauparaha, Ngāti Toa forces besieged Pūtiki Pa in 1829, a reprisal for Whanganui's involvement in the attack on Kapiti, or Waiorua, and further fighting took place in the 1830s. Ngā Rauru and Ngāti Apa included. So the mouth area was largely neutral and a place for the suspension of hostilities as far as its related users were usually concerned. Ngāti Tūmango exercised rights over the Pūtiki district. They had pa in village, urupa, and the usual necessary harvesting places. Roots crops were planted in Whanganui East in the old riverbeds where hue was cultivated. I knew there was some. Aramoho grew kumara, yam, and taro, and all crops grew near waterways. I need to plant some hue. Tangata whenua went birding and egg collecting along the shoreline, notably in the area of the seagull colony at Landguard Bluff, and the lakes in the region were harvested for the eels. At the mouth of the river, however, Ngāti Tūmango also had to work in with the shared interests of the others in the estuarine area. For there is widespread agreement that much of this region exposed to both persistent westerlies and possibly of being picked off by passing taua was a shared place. A place for seasonal fishing and gathering. Pūtiki was Switzerland. It was therefore a loose collection of fishing huts from which waka were launched onto the rich estuarine waters, where the intermingling of salt and freshwater produced a wide range of fish and wildfowl, not to mention plants and shellfish. Fish caught seasonally in this locality included kahawai, stingray, and mullet, as well as whitebait, frostfish, scallops, pepe, and tuatua were also exploited off South Beach. Drying stations too were an essential part of the process. Then the people of the villages along the river would have returned upriver, their canoes laden with dried fish. We know this happened from a range of sources, from Taylor's account of the abduction of the wahipuna below Landguard's Bluff of Andrew Powers and an unnamed blackfellow whaler by fishers from Ngāti Tūwharetoa group. These were most likely a Ngāti Tūwharetoa sub-tribe based at Tokanu. Also my family. Apart from the many accounts of upriver people coming downriver to fish, one source suggests that upriver people also came down from Pūtiki for cultivations. Te Kere, the prophet, he used to stay at Onetiri with his people of Ngāti Tū and Patutokotoko when they came here to cultivate taiwa, or potato. Just by the rifle range in Pūtiki is Pihaia, immediately south of Pūtiki, a place where people from a number of canoe traditions were able to bury their dead. Ngāti Tūmango suggests that those in the Surapa were not always buried in graves. Some were just left in the shifting sands. But they can see that at times sands moved so much along the coast that this may be a reflection of instability rather than some tradition. Rere o Make, Te Rangihiwi Nui's mother, who originates from Ngāti Rua, Ranana, is buried there. However, she has strong and not unusual for her people common ties with Ngāti Tūmango. Pihaia is described in 1888 by Ripeka Tauri as an old burial ground. Haimona Rososka understands that the sands were always moving, so the bodies were simply placed in the sand. The great swamp on the north bank of the river provided raupo for insulating whare, as well as the rich bounty of wetlands, tuna, wildfowl, pollen, and flax. Many groups from the river came to use it. The reserves outlined in the Whanganui purchase deed and how they were achieved over separate negotiations have been recounted and analysed in a number of reports. The original map prepared for the sale of Whanganui settlement area defines the western boundary as a vertical line drawn through Whanganui Beach on the coast and joining with a horizontal line just south of Kawaiki. It was partly in recognition of tangata whenua customary rights to harvest and cultivate that in 1848 some 5,400 hectares were reserved for Māori, Whanganui Māori, a far cry from the 1/10 of the tidal estates originally proposed by the New Zealand Company. What a surprise. Some 15 reserves were named. At Putiki and Kawaiki, the reserves have been subdivided into many different blocks. The Putiki Reserve was cut up into over 25 blocks. We've got a little reference here to that one. The 1848 deed listed the following 15 reserves for Māori which were excluded from the area purchased by the Crown. Eel fishing rights at Wiritoa, Pauri, Kaitoki, that's supposed to be another spelling mistake, Ōkiu and Oakura. Number 2 is Ormanaya, a small wood close to the eastern boundary shown to the surveyor by Te Munu of Marangai. Number 3, Marangai, a wood of almost 11 acres shown in presence of Apurahama Tipai, Ngā Wairiki and Munu. Waikupa near Matarawa Stream for cultivation and timber surveyed in presence of Apurahama Tipai and Munu Paure. 5, Paure, 100 acres on the seaward side shown by Kawana Paipai. Number 6, Putiki Waitangi containing 1,302 acres shown by Horikingi Te Anawa and others of Putiki and Te Mawai of 1,302 acres. Number 7, Kaitoke, about 600 acres. Putiki Kaitoke is shown by Mawai and Kawana Paipai. Purua, number 8, marked by Tahana and others of Purua. Number 9, Mataongonga, burial ground. Number 10, Waipakura, 650 acres of the south side of Whanganui River shown by Tamihana and others of Ngāti Patu Tokotoko. Number 11, Kawaiki, 100 acres shown by natives of Tunu Haere. Number 12, Kaipua, Waipuna Motuhau, cultivations north side of the Whanganui River. Number 13, Ngāturi, a cultivation not surveyed. 14, Aramoho, 240 acres. 15, Tutaika, burial ground marked by Wiramu Iruira and Hoani Rawinata. These reserves, settled upon after discussion with tangata whenua by Maclean and surveyors at the request of Governor Eyre, were a compromise. However, the one that would deliver even less than had formerly been agreed as part of the notoriously untidy sale of Whanganui to the New Zealand Company. See, they were breaking their promises even way back then. But notwithstanding such limitations in the Maclean's purchase, Māori finished up with 600 or 700 acres less than they had previously had in reserves, which Maclean's countered with the suggestion that this was land of higher quality than the previous arrangement. Of course it was. In reality, the establishment of the reserves was more of an ad hoc process of negotiation and hard bargaining by mainly Donald Maclean and some Māori owners. The Whanganui Purchase Deed 1848 listed 15 separate reserves and implied their boundaries had been finalised. But as Bassett and Kay and others have established, this was not to prove the case. Pākaitori was a place not for lower river Māori, but for those from the further upstream, Even in the early 20th century, items of trade such as fruit grown upriver or upriver fish such as piharo were brought down for sale and barter at Pākaiture. It was also, according to the late Hikaya Amohia, a sanctuary, a place where the Māori visitors could camp without fear of attention from the authorities. As old photographs show, it was a place where at certain times of the year many and great waka were moored here. Smart and Bates noted from Taylor that the Reverend Richard Taylor was concerned about the fate of the site, with sunken logs for building and firewood were taken from the foreshore, so Pākaiture has slowly but surely washed out to sea. Hence the debate about its location. Almost certainly the original site has been claimed by the river. The deeply informative, again, that one sentence has been plugged in there to undermine any claims that we make on ancestral sites, because it's been lost to the river, so that site's not there anymore. Hence the debate about its location. Almost certainly the original site has been claimed by the river. The deeply informative Hakaraia Korako indicated that at the time of the Wakefield purchase of Whanganui, his people moved to the growing centre of the settlement because we wanted to be near the Pākehā, but they returned upriver annually to cultivate. There was no doubt that many people of the Whanganui region lived on these lands, harvesting the meadow, snaring birds and cultivating. Pihi Turua's Waiata tells of his desire to cultivate at Ihupuku, Waitotara, but we know he was also doing the same thing at Wangaihu. This may not have been just the exercise of mana whenua, but simply the exercise of the mana of a renowned cultivator with an extraordinary reputation as a fighter. At times, notwithstanding the enmities expressed on other occasions, some Whanganui tribes, including Patu Tokotoko and Rongamai Tāwiri, stayed at Waitotara as Pihi sings in a Waiata. I'll hire me to mend the bird's nest at Tiahupuku. Clearly, an attempt to create peace intermarriage did take place between Ngāti Porua in the Waitotara Valley and Ngāti Pāmoana, and I come from both of those tribes too. Chapter 5. Relations with Ngāti Apa. Relations with Ngāti Apa and Whanganui appear on the whole to have been relatively conflict-free. But as with Ngā Rauru at Kokohuia, there is one battle, this in quite recent historical times, that appears to be memorable and defining. Downes, who writes extensively of this, says it occurred at the outset of the 19th century, so it is immediately pre-European, and for the tribes of the era, pre-Muscat. This dispute and battle are one of a handful that recur in the kōrero of a number of hapu. It began with the capture of the Ngāti Apa chief Te Ahuru and others by Rangitane at Pohaninga, which became an 11th hour reversal of fortune when Ngāti Apa arrived to deliver their own from the already warming ovens. What follows is a useful glimpse into the geopolitics of the early 19th century tribalism of the region. To deliver utu, Te Ahuru sent messages to Waitotara and Pātea asking Ngā Rauru to bring both kai and men. However, Whanganui iwi, it seems, were not asked to participate. Furthermore, Takarangi, on hearing that Ngā Rauru were in the district, actually at the Whanganui River, asserted, "What are these people doing here? I will not allow them to carry food over me." Clearly he felt that his mana whenua was under challenge. The result was occupation by Ngāti Apa of Kaitoke Lake, to which Takarangi responded by a counterattack deep in their territory at Rangitike. Upping the ante, Ngāti Apa brought a large tawa from Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay, killing many Whanganui at Kaiwarawara, close to the mouth of the South Spit. This is described as the site of the fortified pa of the Ngāti Tūwhare Tuatwano of Wirimuti Tauri, new to the district in the immediate pre-treaty era. Downes says the outsiders came in after a Whanganui attack on a large pa, or take hoke at Wangaihu. A Ngā Wairaki woman unnamed was involved, and her reinforcements joined with the men of Rangitike, Turikina and Wangaihu, and after several battles came on to the pa Tukiamaui at Parekino. A very large number of Whanganui are said to have died at Kaiwarawara, South Beach, Whanganui River mouth. The battle gave rise to the following waiata. Lo, the morn of wrath is dawning. At Tongariro, the hundreds the 100 are being incited to defeat Tukapua and Hurutawa. Enveloped by the mist, they will assemble for the fight. They will look on us with disdain, unworthy to fight against, but they will be defeated by daylight. At night I dreamed, I beheld another victory at Kaitwarawara. They were also overwhelmed at Ōtaue, causing the seagulls to scream, "Oe, alas! Oh, my meat is the stench of human corpses." Held back is the wave of Whanganui, lest it should overflow Tai Kordia and also flood Waiwiri. The 100 attacked me in vain. 2-1 against me, I defeated them, and glorious was my victory. They conducted raids on Ōtaue, a small pa on Awarua Creek between Putiki and the dunes. Kaimatira, perhaps significantly above Tūtai Poruporo's old lair at Sparrow Cliff, and then Parikino, Tukia Maui Pa, a stronghold, were all taken. Te Ahuru, who led his taua later, died at Kapiti. Downs provides a waiata cited above commemorating the Ngāti victory. Soon after, a Ngāwariki woman of rank was killed by Ngāti Whiti, located north of Ngāti Hauiti on the Upper Rangitikei region, provoking a revenge attack by a combined group from both Whanganui and Mangawhiro led by Tamatikura. This combination suggests old alliances at work, invoking taua formed from a collection of people whose antecedents predate known waka traditions. Following a reprisal, Pihiturua became involved in a punishment raid at Murimutu, where they killed Ngāti Wharetoa people. Tehina described a battle after a Ngāariki chief was killed by Tehina of Ngāti Kauai at Awamati, the island pa at Paremonui. He was related to Mairoa. Revenge was carried out by Ngāariki, Ngāti Kahungunu, Ngā Wairuki, and other hapus of Ngāti Apa. Here, Ngā Wairuki, along with the other two, is a named entity, and its allies are its neighbour, Ngāariki, as well as the populous neighbour to the east, Ngāti Kahungunu, but it will appear these hapu of Ngāti Apa are battling against Ngāti Apa. Downs' wakapapa for Ngāti Kauai includes such names familiar to the Whanganui people as Aokehu No. 2, and coming down the Hunia family, his account refers to names familiar within Whanganui, Te Ahuru and Tūrangapito, both of whom were Ngāti Apa. Such namings are suggestive of the close ties between what is thought of today as Whanganui and the tribes of the east of the district. Within a short time of the conduct of these battles, the then paramount chief of the entire Whanganui region, Pihiturua, came to Wangaihu to cultivate his kumara. Te Hakeke felt he was trespassing, so sought revenge with assistance from Raukawa, who, in the heke of invaders with Ngāti Toa, had already struck an agreement to live on the lower Rangitikei based on the south bank. They are still there today. Parewahafa is the marae. They attacked Pihi's crops and stores and a home of Pihi's well up the reaches of the lower Wangaihu. Ngāti Apa and the Battle of Kohurupo. Ngāti Apa actually defeated Pihi's forces, compelling them to leave his seed kumara behind. They fired the great warrior's houses and destroyed his kumara. To so provoke a chief of such extraordinary mana appeared to be inviting annihilation. Such was Ngā Wairiki's fear of retribution. They retreated first to Kaungaroa, then to Kohurupo, just below Matatira. On the Whanganui side of Matatira, on the Whanganui side of the Wangaihu River, and there they waited for the expected attack with the strong garrison of Ngāti Apa, Ngāariki, Tupatoa, under the command of Tūrangapito. They had not long to wait. A large party of Rongamai Tāwhiri, Ngā Pairangi and other Whanganui tribes under the leadership of Takarangi and Tauria travelled to Wangaihu, where they commenced a night attack. At about 4 a.m, Takarangi was killed in the fight at Kohurupo, giving rise to the name of this pa, killed in the night. His death occasioned at least 2 waiata, one from his widow, Nuku, the other from Tūrangapito, who apparently delivered his song of defiance from the palisades of the pa to the retreating Whanganui. Yet in the ebb and flow of alliances, it is informative and ironic, but perhaps unsurprising, that this is the same Tūrangapito to whom Pihiturua soon after entrusted in his charmed axe with which to kill Te Rauparaha during the massive attack named Waitangi on Kapiti Island in the bid to put an end to Te Rauparaha. Following Kohurupo, relations appear to have improved between the two protagonists. The great Whanganui chief and peacemaker, Horikingi Te Anawa of Ngāti Ruaka, opened initiatives for reconciliation, partly because of the need for cooperation with growing numbers of Europeans coming to live in New Zealand. Such unity of Whanganui Māori is also expressed forcefully in numerous such acts as Pehi's son, Te Pehi Pakaro Turoa, carried out. It was he who carved the noted piece for his house, Te Ao-Marama, depicting the baby Kepa Te Rangihiwinui in the arms of his mother, Ririomaki. This is a taonga held at the Whanganui Museum. There is further detail according to Wātani Ranginui. Ngāti Apa attacked at Raurikia. They fired a volley as a challenge but saw no one and returned to Kohurupo and built a pa for themselves. Takarangi and his party then appeared and a fight ensued. Whanganui were defeated and Takarangi was killed. These hapu that claim the land are the descendants of those who fought at Kohurupo. Te Hakiki had brought the Ngāti Apa and Ngāti Ruaka together. The whole of the parties who came from Rangitike returned after Kohurupo and shifted down to Paruanui, formerly called Pairua. After Kohurupo, as the land was thus abandoned, the chiefs of Whanganui came to occupy the land about Wangaihu. Pihi Turoa, Kurukanga, Tōpene Te Mamaku, and their various hapu all came. Pihi and Kuruhanga lived on the Wangaihu. Pihi stayed at the mouth and Kurukanga went... Kurukanga? Oh, they've spelled his name differently twice. He's either Kurukanga or Kuruhanga. Lived on the Wangaihu. Pihi stayed at the mouth and Kurukanga went up the Mangawhiro. Tōpene Te Mamaku and his people settled just below Tini Waitara, lower Tuarakina. I have heard that Pihi was attempting to take possession of the land. I think the Horikingi Te Anawa and Te Mawai had made peace with Te Hakiki by this time. Te Hakiki sent Waitere Marumaru and others to tell Pihi and the others to clear off the land, so they did. Te Rangihaiata then attacked the Mairoa and Rangiwaho people living at Awamate Pa, South Rangitike, defeating and scattering them. Downs makes it clear that it was the Wairaki people who were at Waipu. Here Te Aokehu, who was Hakiki's grand uncle, fell in with them as he was travelling from Rangitike to Whanganui. When the Wairaki people heard the guns of the invaders, they rushed to Rangitike, leaving Te Aokehu and a few others to fight, and so by evening Te Aokehu and all his people had been killed. I did not know that. The hapu then fled to Orua and other Rangitike places. One party went up the Turakina to their pa at Pukiahua, and the fugitives were pursued by Ngāti Toa. By now the people of the Lower Whanganui district had been drawn into the musket wars, which will be discussed in more detail before we move to an examination of the evidence of mana whenua, ahika, manakitanga and other practices habitual, customary and traditional of hapu in the Southern District. Wow. So I'm just going to remind everybody that these Waitangi reports, they are not here for just information purposes. They are not trying to inform us particularly. These reports are written for the Select Committee and for members of the government to be able to make decisions about settlements and claims. So absolutely take as much of this kōrero as you can to your kaumātua and validate it, and recognise that the things that are included in these reports are in there to meet objectives that certain people are trying to achieve in these reports. We're going to go on to chapter 6 right after I have a break. Chapter 6, the coming of the European, a Whanganui response. The traditional attitudes of the mouth of the Whanganui River as being a place of food gathering, but a spot too vulnerable to both wind and invaders for lingering, was reinforced by the idea of Te Koura Putaroa, the crayfish's lair. This is a generalised term for places upriver where in times of turmoil and potential invasion, the more closed reaches of the river became a sanctuary to which the more exposed lower river people would retreat. From here in the Wahipari, or place of the cliffs, boulders rolled or logs dropped from above could soon render attacking craft helpless and their crews exposed. But the necessity for this natural stronghold changed with the coming of the Europeans. There were 3 or 4 major impacts that the new arrivals brought almost immediately to Māori traditional life. Those were whaling, missionaries, and trading, especially in muskets, for whose possession a desperate arms race among the tribes took place. There was also the almost entirely unenumerated but extensive impacts of associated new diseases. Each of these effects was to challenge markedly the political geographical foundations upon which Māori society was based. And these are the really difficult impacts to articulate so many years on. Since the influence in the region falls almost entirely outside of the period under study, there will be a little discussion of missionaries, but diseases and epidemic waves began to cross the country soon after settlers began to arrive. Nerengere, a form of leprosy, was an affliction that may have been in the district, particularly the Taupō region, for many years, possibly even before Europeans came to the country. Richard Taylor described it as a species of leprosy which appears peculiar to New Zealand. The ends of the fingers and toes gradually wear away and the joint after joint comes off. Unpleasant. Richard Taylor describes it as a species of leprosy which appears peculiar to New Zealand. The ends of the fingers and toes generally wear away and joint after joint comes off. Oh, I've read that. Taylor said it was contagious, but there is evidence too of devastating influenza, TB, and other illnesses from early in the 19th century. In this discussion, our focus needs to be more particularly on the muskets, which in some districts, to some extent, are interlinked with the whaling. The only reason, however, for detailing the musket wars is to demonstrate the impacts and the nature of loyalty, of blood, and belonging within this claim. What is relevant here is that the Whanganui iwi were no more immune than other unprepared North Island tribes to the depredations of the musket technology in the hands of Ngāpuhi and Tainui Heke. In particular, the alliance under Te Rauparaha and Te Rangi Haiata on its bloody journey south to the whaling and trading stronghold of Kapiti Island. And that, more than their upriver relations, it was the people of the southern Whanganui cluster in the main who were particularly exposed to these raiders. Each of these factors would transform life for Whanganui iwi. Shore whaling had been underway in this country since early in the 19th century, and wherever its practice was viable, it rapidly became a part of the coastal way of life. Whanganui was no exception. Even as late as 1851, George Rees gave an indication of the level of availability at Whanganui of both whales and, by implication, nearby forest. Although both at that time were shadows of their former pre-Māori abundance, from earliest European times forest seems not to have been plentiful in the Whanganui flats. Rees wrote, "A bat is seen flitting about during the summer evenings, and the whale may be often observed passing the river mouth. We know that there was very little forest because single trees appear to have marked boundaries. Mahoi, titoki, kahikatea, for example, all of which species tend to grow in communities. Furthermore, when settlers began building, timber was invariably taken from upriver." Mars suggests that there is no evidence of early shore whaling stations. They may have been offshore rather than onshore, which would have meant little contact with the locals. There is a hint from Jerningham, Wakefield, that one David Scott was trading flax out of Whanganui as early as 1831. Perhaps the greatest effect of the early European influence was the way in which the Putiki area suddenly became more popular. With perceived lessened risk of attack because of European presence and perceived power, the alligator incident must have had a chastening effect, albeit short-lived, along the entire Taranaki coast. I don't know what the alligator incident is. The greater chance for trading, and the benefits seemed to flow from that upriver. Ariki and their tribes quite quickly began to move into the area. Pihi Tutua, for example, whose Ngāti Patutukutuku tribe had for some times occupied Whanganui or Te Ao, a route between western Ruapehu and the Whanganui River. They set up camp near the mouth of the Awarua River at Waipakura. He had, of course, long exercised his rights over a huge domain encompassing the entire river basin and beyond. A paramount chief by birth, position, and fighting prowess, no chief could better be described as a taniwha, in that wherever Pihi Tutua tried to settle or plant, be it in Ngāti Apa, Ngāroru, or parts of the lower Whanganui, people were displaced, and as we have already seen, tenaciously wary of his sting. He had fought and defended many tribes, including even the vast Ngāti Kahungunu, in the days of Panieri, who he vanquished both on attack and then in defence at Puhi Kiriru Pa at Pukekotwai. Rangipo Mesikingi recalls that Pihi Tutua was trained in the tohunga tradition of darkness and light. His ultimate test for his master as a novitiate in the powers of tohungaship was to will to death a favourite uncle. The man accepted his fate as inevitable. It is said that Pihi will live on in the oration of Paitahi Metikingi. In other words, by the 1840s, other families such as the Metakings were picking up his mantle, acknowledging his mana while applying their chieftainship in new ways. One of his wakapapa begins with Mananuia Paiho, who begets Rua Mātātua, down to Tutahorangi, to Manataruki, to Hiniuru, to Waikai Auri, to Haere Tutirangi, to Pākehā, to Irianga, to Pākoro, to Turua. His grandfather, too, was a great fighting chief who, when once captured, overpowered 4 of his captures and escaped. At the end of his life, he expressed a desire for shellfish, and a canoe was quickly dispatched down to the coast for the coveted food. By the time it returned, the old man was dead. Thus, Piperiki, small shellfish, became the name of his place of dying. This account reminds us again that upriver Māori accessed the coast regularly. 2 generations before Pihi Tutua, therefore early in the 18th century. It also reminds us that the Tutua fighting prowess was both a personal attribute and an inheritance. Tu kai ora, hi tawa, Pihi Tutua, te rangi hōpuata, tōpia Tutua. What is of interest to the subject in hand is his presence late in life on the lower river. He went into areas such as Upakangaro, Mākirikiri, Kukuta, expecting to occupy. As we have already seen, he laid claim to gardens at Ngāroru's Ihupuku and Wairaki's Wangaihu, and this was a rangatira whose tūranga waiwai was rooted in the Whanganui o Te Ao, a notable tributary flowing off Ruapehu into the Whanganui. John Maihi of Ngāti Pāmoana commented, "Our tupuna acknowledged his rangatiratanga but disagreed with him planting himself at Upakangaro on the lower end of our areas. Our rangatira Metakingi told him to move on. Our people still acknowledge him for the rangatira that he was, because he was allowed to carry on doing certain things. If our people really were threatened by him, we had a big population here. Why didn't our people wipe him out? Some acknowledged that it was in recognition of his rangatiratanga." Redoubtable ariki of Ngāti Patutukutuku, Pihi Tutua fought his fights across much of the lower half of the North Island against groups as diverse as Ngāpui, Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāroru, and Te Atiawa, and Ngāti Toa. He was instrumental in the attack on Kapiti Island. He came as an old man to Waipakura, just upriver from Putiki. There is a belief that he had wished to stay at Kaiwaiki, but Ngāti Ruaka and Ngāti Pāmoana, building and occupying pā there, contested his rights, supporting Ngā Pairangi. He got into Waipakura through the marriage to a Patapu. Afraid there would be fighting, Korohiki offered him a place at Waipakura, which he accepted. Ngā Pairangi then moved from their Tunuhaere village across the river to Kaiwaiki. It was Korohiki's daughter who married Pihi. But the land was a place to stay, not a gift, says Haimona Rozoska. This is an extremely different relationship to land use than the earlier described access by upriver tribes to the river mouth. While never giving up his lands, Korohiki himself moved to Putiki about 1846. The Ariki lines of Pihis merged with those of Merikingi. He knew that an age and a way of life was gone with his passing. In his dying, he stated, "After me, no more." Thanks to the newspaper Te Waka Māori, we also gain a sense of how much he felt he was a symbol of unity among the Whanganui iwi. The following memory is a recollection from Merikingi of what the dying Tūroa had told Horikingi Te Anawa and Te Mawai in 1845. And I quote, "Abide here when I am gone, cherish your grandchild." This was in reference to Pihi Pākaro Tūroa's younger brother, Tahana Tūroa. "Befriend the Pākehā as a rich possession for you when I am gone. Now in these days you are the last of great men of this people, the last of mana, the last of words, the last of great thought or intelligence, the last of generosity, the last of power." Merikingi then asked Tūroa what he had to say, to which the dying son of Tūroa almost 30 years later replied, "Kepa and Mete, cease your wandering, occupy yourselves with the care of your people. Kepa, when I am gone, be very careful of the people. Guide the canoe with your vigor and skill. When I am dead, let my body remain here, that you may all be near me." It was the end of an era, the beginning of a new one, led by different families. Much of the river's leadership made their way to take up residence, if not at Putiki, then quite nearby. Although it has been suggested that no one was living at Putiki by the 1830s, it is truer to say that perhaps no one did for a couple of years after Te Rauparaha's attacks. Then everyone came. The theme here is of movement from inland residences towards the coast, of which Pihi pushing into the lower reaches of the Whanganui. Waitotara and Wangaihu is but one example of a powerful chief who came into the coastal region looking for wider opportunities. No fight took place between Tūmango and Patu Tokotoko, but their weaknesses was shown by their inability to drive off Patu Tokotoko. So Patu Tokotoko eased their way in. It was only when Te Mawai came that they were able to drive them off. Te Mawai, who with his people occupied this land before the Treaty of Waitangi, was put on the land at Pungaharuru as a kind of caretaker, was well born and well married and of a highly independent nature. Hakaroa Korako of Ngā Potama and married Kepa Te Rangihiwinui's sister spoke of Te Mawai and of how he married Ripekerere of Ngāti Tūmango. Te Mawai's wife belonged to Ngāti Tūmango on one side. Ngāti Tūmango were the owners of Putiki and the whole of the land that was sold. Korako said. The Mawai's proper residence was Ranana. He remained permanently on this land and brought his tribe, Ngāti Ruaka, to reside here. His residence on the block continued up to the first purchase of the Whanganui land. This was well before the treaty was signed. Te Mawai first came to Putiki before Honi's parents did. It was before Te Rauparaha's invasion, although it is unclear whether it was before the first or second attack. Merikingi was a relative latecomer to Putiki. His advent at Putiki was subsequent to the second sale, i.e. Maclean's, which followed the Wakefield's purchase. Ngāti Ruaka and Tūpoho descendant Te Aiwa, who married Titia. Okay, so Te Aiwa was from Te Arawa and Titia was from Tūpoho, and from that union came Te Mawai, Horikingi Te Anawa and Ririomake. Pretty sure there were two other siblings as well. Might have been different parents. Te Mawai came down river from Ranana to make his home at Putiki. Huane Wiremu Hipango, a descendant of Tūmango and esteemed ariki of the lower river, was later killed at the Battle of Ohautahi. Had a sister Tariti who married Te Mawai. Ripeka, their daughter, married Tauri, another significant chiefly name on the river. Te Mawai had the mana over the whole of Putiki, not including the reserve and Matahiwi, which were under the mana of Hone Wiremu. Wiremu Tauri was a resident at Awarua. It seems that Ngāti Tūmango, struggling to hold the land, needed Te Mawai's mana and force of character. Hone Wiremu gave this land to Te Mawai because he had enough followers to protect it from aggressors. So he handed it over to Te Mawai, who was a powerful man. Anglican sources state Wiremu Te Tauri of Ngāti Tuwharetoa in Whanganui was for some time the head teacher for Richard Taylor. He was present at the tangi for the martyrs Te Manahira and Te Kiriopa in 1847. Intermarriage between the Tauri whānau and those at Putiki is an important part of the binding of ties between the mountain and the lower river people. This statement confirms Ngāti Tūmango's presence at Putiki. There are indications that, in the immediate pre-treaty era, Araki, including Te Mawai, moved downriver and were welcomed at a time where taua skirmishing along the coast were making it difficult for the Tūmango people. Among others who were quick to settle in and take up new opportunities, arranging new power groupings included Te Mawai's brother, Hori Kingi Te Anawa of Ngāti Ruaka, also originally based at Ranana, and whose sister was Piehi Turua's principal wife. At the invitation of Wiremu Hipango, he too came down to live at Putiki. His wives, serially, were Te Hukinga of Ngāti Ruru, and following her death, Ramarihi Taukari, also known as Te Ao Tariwa. Honi Wiremu Hipango was a man of mana and an accommodating chief. In the 1850s, he and Te Mawai, who had arrived before the treaty was signed, also invited a number of others to reside there, including the somewhat peripatetic but largely upriver Poropiti Te Kere to stay at Awarua. Te Kere's following at the end of the century was considerable. Following the sale of Whanganui, he also gave Kaiate and Matahiwi to Metakingi.